Hi, Paul.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very glad to see you. So, I think we can start then. So, dear guests, it is with great pleasure and enthusiasm that I'm here before you today to inaugurate this event where the students and professors of Zhytomyr Polytechnic State University will engage with our distinguished guest, Mr. Paul Massaro, the senior political advisor of the US Helsinki Commission. This occasion serves as a platform to explore the crucial role of the Helsinki Commission in fostering victory and peace in Ukraine. And the Helsinki Commission, as an esteemed body committed to promoting human rights, democracy, and security, has played an instrumental role in advocating for Ukraine's interests on the international stage. And today we have the unique opportunity to delve into the Commission's invaluable contributions and gain a deeper understanding of their impact on our latest journey towards victory. One crucial aspect we will focus on is the role of Ukrainian youth in shaping the world after our eventual triumph. As the inheritors of a future Ukraine, your voices, visions, inspirations carry immense weight. It is through your innovative thinking, resilience, and determination that we will construct a nation that thrives in all domains. And today we gather to recognize your potential as catalyst for positive change and to discuss how we can best channel your energy towards building a prosperous and harmonious future. And in addition, we will explore the international mechanisms available for safeguarding the rights of individuals during times of war, because we find ourselves in challenging circumstances where the protection and preservation of human dignity become even more paramount, and by understanding and harnessing the power of this mechanism, we can work towards alleviating the suffering of those affected by this war and ensuring the rights are respected and paving the way for a more just and compassionate society. And lastly, we will delve into the mechanisms that can be employed to increase pressure on terrorist state Russia, with the ultimate goal of securing our victory. As the power of diplomacy, economic leverage, and political strategies cannot be underestimated in our quest for a sovereign Ukraine, and together we shall explore the potential avenues through which we can amplify our efforts and send a resounding message that we stand united in the face of adversity. I encourage each and every one of you to actively participate in today's discussion. Your thoughts, insights, visions, and questions are integral to the success of this event. It is through open dialogue and the exchange of ideas that we can forge a path towards a brighter future. And I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Paul Massaro for his presence here today. His expertise and experiences will undoubtedly shed light on the topics at hand and provide us with a broader perspective. We are honored to have him join us in this endeavor. In closing, I express my anticipation and excitement for the rich and stimulating discussions that lie ahead, and let us seize this opportunity to learn, collaborate, and inspire one another. Together, let us explore the role of the Helsinki Commission in bringing about victory and peace in Ukraine, the role of Ukrainian youth in shaping our post-victory world, international mechanism for protecting people's rights during war, and the mechanisms to exert greater pressure on the terrorist state for our ultimate triumph. Thank you, and let us begin this momentous event with fervor and determination. And now I honor to give the floor to a professor of Polytechnic University to represent her. Please.
Thank you very much. Greetings from microphone. Thank you very much. Greetings from Zhytomyr Polytechnic. So here you see a lot of students as well as colleagues, yes, so academicians, and with our most profound respect and appreciations, we would love to listen to your word first. And thank you very much for finding time and opportunity in very restricted circumstances and time frames to be here present with us and to take the word. Thank you.
Well, Dyakuyu, Mikola, and Dyakuyu to the Polytechnic. Thank you to you. I mean, this is a great honor for me. I take every opportunity I can to speak to classes, students, young Ukrainians. To me, y'all are this incredible mishmash between the American greatest generation who fought and defeated the Nazis and the American founding generation who sort of declared our independence and established the American Republic. And I see the best traits of both of these sort of legendary generations in the American mythos in this youngest generation of Ukrainians. And I mean, I often say, you know, if only your average American could be more like the Ukrainians are right now, you know, we'd be in a fundamentally different place. And perhaps we could have deterred this war. I mean, I always express my regret that, you know, we had a lot of different opportunities to prevent this full-scale invasion, this genocide, this awful thing that's happening to you. And I also never missed the opportunity to emphasize that, you know, if you hadn't stopped this, if the Ukrainians hadn't fought, if the Ukrainians had elected instead to surrender, which, you know, I never talk to a Ukrainian who ever sees that as an option, as though it were any sort of option. It was always, you know, for the Ukrainians, it was always we were going to fight. But of course it was an option, and it had been an option, and many peoples in history had elected the option of surrender. Well, we'd likely be in World War III today, because, you know, I think that all of us who understand Russia understand that Russia had no intention of stopping at the conquest of Ukraine, but indeed would have gone on into Moldova, would have incurred into NATO. China has every intention of invading Taiwan. It's made its intention clear. We should believe our adversaries when they tell us their intentions. So, you know, I'm blown away over and over and over again by the resolve and the commitment of the Ukrainians. And I only wish we had been and were being more committed to the values we promote, we profess to believe in. Because if we were, you know, perhaps we wouldn't only now be sending F-16s. Perhaps we would have already sent ATACMS. Perhaps it wouldn't have taken a year and a half to send tanks, a year and a half to go through this endless process of, okay, this one weapon, then pressure, then we send it, then next weapon, then pressure, then it shouldn't be like this. You know, it should be no question at all that we support Ukraine. And I actually think when you talk with your average American, I think that's where they are. I think this is more a product of 30 years of a flawed paradigm in thinking in the post-Cold War. But, you know, I don't want to give too long an intro. I really want to hear your questions and answer your questions and talk about what you want to talk about. I guess as Mikola really emphasized the Helsinki Commission, I'll just say we were founded in '76. We are structured like a committee of Congress. We're led by 9 senators and 9 representatives. We're bipartisan and bicameral. You know, our job originally and our job remains to basically hold Russia to account to its kind of freely undertaken commitments. Obviously, Russia is violating, I mean, Russia makes a farce of international law. It signs up to things and then, you know, essentially just violates them immediately, ultimately in an attempt to demonstrate what a farce international law is. But if we actually enforce international law against Russia, then it has standing. So we always are the guys there, going all the way back to '76 when Kissinger did not want to essentially enforce the human rights commitments undertaken by the Soviet Union. So going all the way back to '76, we've been the ones there essentially trying to push the US government to stick, you know, to stick to our highest ideals, to see that our foreign policy is values-driven, which we view as the true essence of long-term security. So when it really comes down to it, if we're not promoting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, then we're setting ourselves up for failure, and we're setting ourselves up for, huge security problems in the future. And obviously, Russia's signed up to all this, so Russia's got to hold to it too, even if we have to force them to, even if you have to force them to.
Thank you very much. It sounds, very proactive and peaceful, future-oriented, and thank you very much for such a beginning. And so let us just open up the dialogue, if you don't mind. And if you give me such an opportunity, I will ask the students with the questions, right? Thank you, dear.
Great.
Do we have any questions? Oh yes, we have the question, and may I please give the word to our colleague Andriy Pasechnik, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of International Law of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. He is also an instructor of the Department of International Relations and Political Management. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much for such great introduction. Nice to meet you, Paul. I think there was a time when we got together back in Washington as I was serving my diplomatic tenure there at the embassy. Now, as you can see, I'm very honored to serve as a tutor at the Zhytomyr Polytechnic University. As you said on the outset, it is always a pleasure to talk with young minds, with young students, see their enthusiasm, see their idealistic ideas, and help them shape their future. So just to kick off the discussion, let me ask you two questions. First, we now witness the beginning of the presidential campaign in the United States. Some of the candidates, like current incumbent President Biden, and recently some more people have already declared their intentions to run. So I wanted to ask whether you could give us your opinion how coming campaign can impact on support of Ukraine by the United States, and whether you see possible threats of support of Ukraine being in decline should the administration change, because we all know that elections in America are real, unlike elections in Russia. And second part of the question, yeah, there's no doubt about it. And second question, if I may, how do you see perspectives of Washington changing its opinion regarding Ukraine joining the NATO? Because we have seen some voices from Europe, mostly coming from the civil society, but also from a number of governments of Europe, that Ukraine should join NATO as soon as possible, possibly even before the ending of the current war. With some limitations regarding the participation of NATO allies in this war. But we all understand and we are fully aware that, everybody's looking at DC. If Washington would be, more proactive on the matter of Ukraine becoming a full-fledged ally of NATO, then more government would be, more Europeans would be brave enough, bold enough to also publicly state their support for this idea. So sorry for such long questions. I sincerely hope that will help to kick off our discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great to see you again. And I think they're the sort of the 2 points of just intense interest that get kind of asked over and over again by Ukrainians, but not only Ukrainians, a lot of Central and Eastern Europeans in particular, and again, not only Central and Eastern Europeans. I mean, you go to Germany, and it's like the number one topic is the presidential election. I mean, it's, I understand the intense interest. I'll say, first and foremost, we're very far out from the presidential election still. I mean, it's a year and a half A lot changes in a year and a half, a lot. It's really hard to say even where candidates' positions are because, DeSantis, who seemed, just a few weeks ago to be some sort of favorite, is already having a crash and burn rollout. He doesn't know really where he stands on things. He seems to just be chasing after Trump's positions, whatever's popular. Maybe, he might change his position just to, create a difference between him and Trump if it comes down to that. I mean, we don't even know where Trump stands, really. All we know is that Trump said, hey, if I were president, the war would be over already. What does that mean? Well, could well mean he would have given Ukraine an enormous amount of weapons. It's really impossible to say where people would have stood. You can't know the counterfactual. You can't know what would have happened. I mean, you can look at the Trump administration previously, and despite, Trump's very, very strange rhetoric vis-a-vis Putin in particular, the Trump administration were the first to arm the Ukrainians. They did put a lot of sanctions on Russia, so there's a lot of policy reasons to believe that, top-level Republican policymakers, if they were put back in those positions, would maintain, or perhaps even accelerate, providing weapons to Ukraine. I mean, I'll say nothing succeeds like success, and at this point, it's becoming harder and harder and harder to straight face take the position of being pro-Russia, and I think we see this more and more. Tucker going off the air was an enormous piece of this. He did not go off the air ultimately because of Russia-related reasons. He went off the air because of a defamation lawsuit you probably may have seen. Fox ultimately had to pay out $800 million because of these kind of bald-faced lies Tucker was making on the air about election systems. And he just became kind of too expensive to keep. His new platform with Twitter is not going to be nearly as impactful because the audience that kind of votes and that paid attention to him on Fox News is not on Twitter. Most of them, they're older Americans. They don't even know how to. They probably might not even have smartphones for all we know. So it's a completely different audience that's on Twitter. It's more kind of like the tankies and the radicals, the MAGA radicals and stuff like that. So you're not reaching the kind of people that actually vote. So it's a much less impactful audience. We've seen this over and over again, including in the Harris campaign, where Kamala Harris really focused on Twitter and ultimately was unable to kind of get the vote in the primaries. So, I would say my hope and what we're pushing for very hard at the Helsinki Commission is that Ukraine will win the war this year. I think there's a lot of reason to believe Ukraine can win the war this year. People keep thinking in terms of amphibious assault of Crimea or something like that. Well, Ukraine doesn't need to do an amphibious assault of Crimea. All it needs to do is destroy Kerch Bridge and cut the land bridge in half, and basically Ukraine's extremely close to winning the war. At that point, it's a matter of, you could starve Crimea, take Crimea, and then, there's a handful of people left over in the eastern Donbass, I guess. But at that point, no American with a straight face is going to say, oh yeah, Russia's still going to win this thing. If the momentum swings in Ukraine's direction, everybody falls behind Ukraine. And that's we've seen this before. We saw this with the Kharkiv and Kherson offensives. We saw this in the beginning with the Battle of Kyiv and the defense of Kyiv. What's really, and what I've tried to emphasize over and over again is, sadly, very sadly, I think a lot of Westerners, including Americans, are numb to tragedy, which is awful because there's lots of tragedy and horrible evils that have been committed by Russia against Ukraine, and they will answer for that. But what's really been unique, I think, about the Ukrainian experience is the heroism and the courage and the fighting back, and that's what has really caught the Western imagination. So as we see the counteroffensive roll out, and there's every reason to believe it'll be successful. This small group of Budanov's, pet Russians that he sent into Belgorod was just unbelievable. It's just, there's every reason to believe that the Russians are on their last legs. Prigozhin is pulling out with his Wagnerites and stuff like that. So it kind of feels like we're at this juncture where there could be a huge push. And all it takes is for that critical mass to be hit and for the Russian lines to collapse. At which point, you will never hear about this again in the presidential election. everyone will be on Ukraine's side, you know? I mean, so it's just kind of one of these things that, you know, once the momentum swings, nobody wants to be, you know, siding with essentially the loser or the perceived loser or whatever it is. Anyway, it's a far way off still. So, okay, NATO, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, we've in Congress, in both chambers, introduced this Ukraine victory resolution that, you know, sets as a condition of victory for Ukraine to be a part of NATO, obviously. I mean, look, we committed to this in Bucharest in 2008. This is not a question of US policy. Ukraine has to be part of NATO. We already said it would be. I mean, all NATO states said it would be. It's just a matter of when it happens. I mean, we've been pushing for essentially the Vilnius summit to give Ukraine a, you know, concrete and specific conditions for joining NATO. Essentially saying, here's the 5 things or whatever it's going to take. You get them, you're in NATO, and that's that. And that's what we need to see. That's what we need to see at this point. I mean, I have no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt in a lot of members of Congress's mind that Ukraine will become part of NATO. We've already committed to it. It's just this same old. Now that Ukraine is the second most powerful military in the West, and you know, I mean, I'm saying we're more powerful, but who knows? Maybe we're not. Honestly, at this point, maybe Ukraine is the most powerful. You know, so I mean, it's just a matter of like, why wouldn't we? I mean, I would feel much safer having Ukraine in NATO. So I mean, I think that the pendulum is swinging in that direction. The more success Ukraine sees on the ground, the more successful Ukraine is. It's, you know, the rich get richer, and that's exactly what's going to happen. So I fully anticipate Ukraine will be part of NATO in the near future. I think it's totally in the cards. You know, once Ukraine has won the war, or at least once Ukraine has 90% back. I mean, you know, there's going to come a point at which Ukraine is so far advanced and Russia is so weak that, you know, negotiations can be held that will involve Russia entirely leaving Ukraine, right? I mean, that will be the basis, the starting point of the negotiations. And part of that will be Ukraine joining NATO.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much for the answer. And let's see if we have the questions. Yeah, welcome. Kate, will you please help me? Michael.
I'm Victoria Zakirova, a student of International Relations.
Just a second, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Zakirova, the student of International Relations, and I'd like you to answer my question. Of course, war affects people, and including young Ukrainians. And my question is, how effective do you think it is for the country that young people are currently following the news about the war, and whether it can change their worldview in favor of the country? Thank you.
Do you mean Americans or Ukrainians, or I mean, what, young people generally?
I mean in general, but mostly Ukrainians.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is the most black and white, the most black and white conflict since World War II, right? I mean, this is the German invasion of Poland, except when the Germans invaded Poland, the United States did nothing at all. Britain and France declared war and did nothing, and the Russians and the Germans invaded and split up Central and Eastern Europe and drove us into the most horrific episode of human history. I mean, this is exactly that again. And I mean, I think that in one sense, Ukrainians and what we're seeing from Ukraine is, I think, helping people to, come around after a very confusing few decades to the notion that, like, oh wait, like being armed is important to maintaining our freedom, and you gotta, like, the kind of freedoms that we enjoy are things we can't take for granted. I mean, it's a slow process, because I think I think one has to understand that, like, I mean, it's not been a good few decades for democracies, for kind of the West. I mean, there's been this kind of malaise, complacency, sort of a feeling, I think, across the board that, like, well, shit, maybe we're the bad guys, and maybe like getting involved in this sort of stuff is against. I mean, it's one of the reasons, like, I mean, the botched Afghan pullout, the Iraq War, all of this kind of stuff, I think has led to this kind of feeling among young people in particular, among my generation and the generation after me, that, well, maybe we shouldn't be so actively engaged. But I think what we're seeing in Ukraine is that, like, no, we got to be. We got to be there. We got to be set. We got to be ready to go. And it's, undoing kind of this negative programming that's been, again, it's been exacerbated by Russian and Chinese disinformation, but it's certainly been, like any good disinformation or propaganda, there's a kernel of truth to it. I mean, we did screw up. We did invite corruption into our societies. We did sell out our democracies to some extent. There is a corruption problem, both in the United States and in Germany with Nord Stream 2 and in Ukraine. I mean, we have to, there used to be these things we said in the United States in our history. One of sort of the quintessential sayings in the founding of the Republic attributed to Jefferson of eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And Ronald Reagan said something very similar, and freedom is never more than a generation from extinction. And we used to sort of talk like this. We used to think that, wow, we got to really fight for this, and we've got to really stand for this, and we've got to really believe in it, because it could be gone just like that. And I think that, we lost that feeling, and that's the reason we're in this circumstance. We lost the deterrent effect, so I think we're all relearning that, and I think Ukrainians are relearning that, and I think that the youth, so to speak, are relearning that, because I think we're the most vulnerable to kind of this notion of, well, maybe, democracies are imperfect too, and maybe we're the real bad guys and all that kind of stuff. But I'm personally quite hopeful. I think Ukraine teaches us, how to live, and also kind of teaches us, in one sense, the appropriate uses of force. I mean, Ukraine is, the Ukrainians said right at the beginning, we don't want to fight, but if you make us fight, we're going to defeat you, and it's going to be our finest hour, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Ukraine. And it's kind of this, it's a heroism, but it's not kind of, in its nationalism, it's a healthy nationalism, but it's not in this way that kind of this jingoism has become associated in the West. Kind of any waving of the flag or patriotism is associated with whatever, like, fascism or the American invasion of Iraq or something like this. Whereas, we need to be healthy patriots, because, you look at Germany's Gallup polls, and like 19% of Germans would be willing to fight if their country was invaded. That's pathetic. We have to be willing to defend what we've built. We've built amazing societies. We've built a lifestyle worth defending. The Ukrainians understand this because they're right next to Russia. They see what the alternative is. The Central and Eastern Europeans know what the alternative is because they were just under it a few decades ago. And we need to sort of internalize that and understand it. So yes, I think it's a long answer. I think we're learning more than you guys, because I think a lot of Ukrainians, kind of learned it instantaneously. There's no teacher like the Nazis bombing your cities and, tying people up and shooting them in the back of the head, right? It's a great and awful irony that it's those Ukrainians that tended to have kind of the more neutral views toward Russia who have borne the brunt of Russia's invasion. And I think there's not a single Ukrainian neutral toward Russia any longer. So I think the Ukrainians learned instantaneously, but we're still learning. But we're learning. Too slowly, but we're learning.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your response. And let's proceed to our next question. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Anastasia and I'm a student in International Economic Relation, and my question is, what is your assessment of the situation of human rights and freedom in Ukraine, and what problem do you think need the most attention and why? Thank you.
Well, the problem that needs the most attention is the Russians. we gotta get the Russians out of Ukraine. I mean, you know, it's yeah. So I mean, I know what you're asking. I'm just being a little. Look, the human rights situation in Ukraine is good. Has been for a long time. There's obviously been, you know, I mean, I've worked on Ukraine for a lot of years actually. I mean, I wrote a report on the fight against corruption in Ukraine back in 2015. The government report. I've worked on a lot of sanctions against kind of oligarchs like. And investigations against oligarchs like, say, Kolomoisky, against organized crime figures like Firtash. So, I mean, I'm familiar with some of this stuff. I mean, the problems with you, I guess, you know, I think is honestly, I personally find that it's kind of like a Westerner right now criticizing like the democracy or governance structures of Central and Eastern European countries is kind of bullshit because we got it so wrong, so like now's the time to just kind of sit back and listen. But I think just from kind of the stuff that I know in my perspective, look, Ukraine's got a very vibrant democracy. I mean, the Ukrainians have demonstrated a number of times that they're not going to tolerate autocracy. You know, you've already had 2 revolutions. You know, if any, I mean, it's kind of extraordinary that the 2 times that Russia has tried to use, you know, take advantage of corruption and consolidate power within Ukraine through its puppets, the Ukrainians just absolutely would not have it. So it's, I mean, that kind of resistance is amazing because you can look at like a neighbor like Belarus and be like, oh my God, like obviously this is not, you know, a foregone conclusion that Ukraine is going to be a democracy, but the Ukrainians are just so naturally democratic in this really kind of profound way. Like the Ukrainians. These are just my observations, working very closely with Ukrainians over the last year and a half, almost every single day, that like if I need anything, I call a Ukrainian buddy, say Mikola or something like that, and before I know it, I've got like 300, that's like, you know, I need some Ukrainians to show up at this event, you know, yeah, sure, I'll get 300 people there, and it's just like, whoa, how, you know, like, the networks that Ukrainians form are just extraordinary. There's kind of this spontaneous democratic spirit among Ukrainians. I mean, I think it's a product of a lot of things. I mean, I think it's a product of, you know, certainly having to avoid the corruption of Soviet systems. I mean, the colonial apparatus that has long kind of been stuck by Russia onto Ukraine was a parasitic apparatus. The government was to be avoided, so the people would kind of demonstrate, you know, create their own systems that were secondary and removed from the government. I also think, and that's like one reason, so it's kind of the resistance to colonialism. I also think it's a product of just kind of like the Ukrainian national spirit. I mean, it's the sort of Cossack spirit in a sense. So I mean, it's like both of these things create this profoundly free and democratic society. So I've never seen the human rights situation as a problem. I think, I mean, look, I think Ukraine has, you know, as good, if not better, human rights record than any Western country. I mean, I think that, you know, again, the major issues tend to still fall under governance. I think decentralization was a great initiative. You know, the Ukrainian judiciary remains, you know, in need of certain reforms. I mean, I think there's much lower tolerance for corruption in Ukraine than there's been in a long time. I don't think young Ukrainians, I don't think y'all are going to accept a return to the status quo after victory. I mean, if that were the case, then what was the victory for? You know, what did all these people die for, if not for Ukraine under the rule of law as part of the EU and NATO? So I think that kind of the remnants of kind of the Soviet apparatus, the really Russian colonial apparatus is what I should call it. You know, the days of that system are numbered, but they're still there. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, the problems still tend to be kind of almost typical, like bribes to the judiciary kind of issues, state-owned enterprises, things like that. that tend to be the big problems. But I have no doubt that Ukraine is going to take these on, because I think young Ukrainians understand it's going to be necessary to enter the EU. It's going to be necessary to become part of NATO. So they're going to do it, because I think that young Ukrainians have a vision for what they want out of their lives and what they want out of their country, and they treasure this kind of a lifestyle and system even more than we who already have it do. So I think it's going to happen.
May it happen. Thank you. So let's go further. Questions, please.
Hello, it's Raz Bliznyk from the Faculty of the Information and Software Technologies. My question is, what is the importance of the future tribunal on Russian war criminals, and at what level should it be conducted? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I mean, look, there's got to be accountability for these guys. I want to be, I guess I want to be realistic toward what we see out of Russia, right? Russia is a fascist society. I mean, it's deeply, deeply fascist. We were just in Nuremberg, actually, on a congressional trip, where we kind of drew the parallel between, the German fascists answering for their crimes, and and saying the Russian fascists will also answer for their crimes. That said, I mean, the great irony of these things is the Russians stood in judgment over the Germans, despite the fact that they started World War II together as allies. So it's like, Russia has never, ever, ever answered for centuries of crimes. Okay? It's not just the genocide being committed against Ukrainians today. Russia needs to answer for the Stalinist purges. It needs to answer for all the crimes of the Soviet Union. It needs to answer for, the earlier genocides it committed as the Russian Empire. It's just like Russia has evaded responsibility for a very, very long time. So I guess I want to be realistic about where we're going to end up with this stuff. I think the ICC warrant is huge for a lot of different reasons. I think it delegitimizes Putin. I think it delegitimizes his regime. But I just want to, I think that in all likelihood, after Ukrainian victory, we're going to be dealing with basically a North Korea-style situation with Russia for potentially decades, where we just have to lock Russia down. I could be wrong about that. I hope I'm wrong about that. Obviously, Prigozhin seems to be making noises like I might be wrong about that, like he'll start some civil war or something in Russia potentially with his Wagnerites. Who knows? I think I've said over and over again, we need demilitarization, denuclearization, and decolonization of Russia before we can remove sanctions. But the reality that Russia is going to hand over a bunch of people to be prosecuted is unlikely. The reason we could do it in the case of Nuremberg, and again, very, it was better than nothing, but it was also not ideal because the Soviets, were part of the prosecuting party. But the reason we could do it in that case was because we leveled Germany, we burned the country to the ground. Berlin was ashes and dust by the time that happened. We cannot do the same to Russia. There's, I find it ridiculous, for example, that we prohibit Ukraine from striking military sites in Russian territory, that we absolutely should, allow our weapons to be used for that, because these sites are being used as staging locations for Russian terrorist attacks. But, there is a limit to this. You can't start attacking Russian cities or something like that, or you may trigger Russian nuclear doctrine. If the Nazis had nuclear weapons, we probably could not have engaged in this kind of all-out warfare we ultimately engaged in against Germany. So, somebody will stand trial eventually. I think it's much more likely that Putin dies dies of disease or kills himself or in a bunker or whatever, than he stands trial in The Hague. I hope he stands trial in The Hague. I'd love to see him do that, but I think the reality is, all these mechanisms, they're important to talk about, but I guess I don't want to put too much bandwidth into them, because I don't want them to be used as an excuse for doing less on weapons. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters, like 90%, is getting Ukraine the stuff to push all of Russian troops out of its territory.
Thank you. So, and we have one more question. Welcome.
So you said about anything for pushing the Russians out of our territory, and there was some information that Ukrainians abroad are starting to learn, especially our pilots are starting to learn how to use F-16. So on your opinion, when will F-16 appear at the front line, like on the eastern occupied territories?
In a couple months, probably. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I don't want to, and I also really don't want to push. I really disagree with these people that want to push Ukraine into kind of launching the counteroffensive before it's ready. I think Ukraine should take its time. I think it should be damn good and ready and feel like it's got everything going on. And I think all the shaping operations currently happening are kind of the appropriate move. I mean, I trust the Ukrainian military in particular and intelligence services to make the right decisions. They've been right on Kyiv. They've been right on Kharkiv and Kherson. They've been right on Bakhmut. They've been right over and over and over and over again when we've been wrong. So we'll just sort of give them the time. I'll tell you, when it does happen, it's going to really be something. I mean, when the Russians run into their first Abrams tank, when the first F-16 shoots down the first Su, at that point, Russian morale should collapse. I mean, the weapons, we had no idea we produced such, kick-ass weapons. I mean, these are some pretty, I don't know. It's just, we've been spending the last 30 years fighting terrorists who you can't fight with this kind of stuff. I mean, American military doctrine for the longest time had been entirely prepped. All our weapons had been built. Everything had been thought about the eventual cataclysmic war with the Russians, which never came because y'all ultimately destroyed the Soviet Union from within. Well done, Ukraine. But now, it's just kind of like, well, now the Ukrainians are fighting this kind of like eventual war of independence with Russia, and these weapons were all built and designed to destroy the Russian military, and they're going to do their job really, really well. I mean, just like when we see like the Patriot versus the Kinzhal. I mean, it's just amazing. And I mean, the way the Ukrainians learn these weapons and use them. So I think we should all expect similar demonstrations of aptitude, as we've seen with the Patriot and the Kinzhal once the F-16s and the Abrams. I mean, the Abrams I saw just this morning have arrived in Grafenwehr, Germany. I was in Grafenwehr just a month ago, seeing where our guys are training Ukrainian troops. And without revealing too much, I'll just say, we're feeling pretty good. I mean, we're feeling as good as one can feel, I guess. You never feel good about these things, but given the circumstances, I think Ukraine's going to be well prepared.
Thank you for the answer. So, some other questions? Oh, yeah. Okay. Kate, may I please ask you I have two questions over here. Yeah. Could you please take the microphone? Yes, thank you. Yeah, you may. Why not?
Okay, so first.
Here, yeah, so now we see you.
So first
Good.
of all, hi, I'm Dimas Tesik, and currently I'm majoring in international relations. And I was thinking about how we, as young people of our country, have a huge impact on our country's future. And here's my question: in your opinion, what is the best way of involving students and young people overall in rebuilding our country in this whole post-war situation?
Yeah, I guess it's a question I get a lot, and what I really encourage people to do is, enter politics. I think the only way that, and that could be being part of a party, it could be running for election yourself, it could be, working in the political systems. I mean, the reality is, at the end of the day, the only way things get better is if you really put yourself out there, and I mean, it's painful and it's hard. I mean, it's extremely frustrating, especially today, especially in the way that our political systems work with, you know, your whole personal life will be thrown out online and everything like that. But it's never been more necessary to have people that kind of, you know, feel passionately and, you know, want to get involved and want to be a part of this. I mean, I think that you guys, you know, you suffer a little less on this than we do. I mean, in the United States, like, all of our leadership is like over 80 years old right now. It's really a weird situation, and it's something I've never seen before. You know, it's like doesn't feel very, I mean, at one point in our history, our president was 41 years old, you know, Teddy Roosevelt, you know, I mean, the youngest president, but and that was in like our greatest age, and we were starting to like just kind of make our mark on the world stage. But I mean, it's been very disheartening to me. Kind of like I'll go to my sort of local political clubs and I'll be like one of two millennials there, you know? So it's like moving from kind of the online stuff, which, you know, I know the online stuff matters. It does matter. People think, you know, it does matter. But to being like there in person and to demanding accountability in person and to, you know, putting yourself in the line of fire, essentially. I mean, for you guys, literally, because I know, like, you know, a lot of you know, will be volunteering or have volunteered to fight, which, you know, itself is the most important thing. And God bless you. But you know, to me, that's the best thing you can do. I mean, it's that we're blessed to have these democratic political systems, to live in this era where anyone can be a part of the political system. Not enough of us recognize that. We should recognize it more, and we should be a part of it.
Yeah, so thank you for your answer.
Thank you for the question, and we are having one more question, right? Yeah.
Hi. My name is Anastasia Zolotarenko, and I have a really interesting question. If you had the opportunity to change something in our country, what it will be?
In Ukraine? There's a lot I would change in America. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I you know, I guess it's maybe a little bit of a cop-out answer. I mean, I guess there's like things in the margins I change about Ukraine. I mean, I think Ukraine right now demonstrates the best of humanity. I mean, I even look at like Ukraine's almost legendary trifecta of leadership at this moment, sort of Zelensky, Zaluzhny, Budanov, and it's kind of like, oh my God, look at these guys. You know, I mean, it's you know, I got into government in America because I believed in American values, and I still do. And I think I'm asked a lot, sort of like, you know, why do I support Ukraine like I do? I'm not Ukrainian. You know, you know, I don't have a Ukrainian girlfriend. I don't have a Ukrainian family, you know, whatever. You know, I never even went to the country before the full-scale invasion, and it was just one of 57 countries I worked on, you know. But like what the Ukrainians have shown the world, and I think that what the Ukrainians have demonstrated, I think is the model for all of us. And I think that that's, you know, to me, something's been lost in the last 30 years. You know, maybe it's been longer. Certainly in the United States, in the last 30 years. I think in Europe, it happened after World War II, I mean, Western Europe. But we kind of have lost the kind of passion within democracy, the way that our system is supposed to speak to us with values and ideals and lives worth striving for. It's become this kind of like endless materialistic bickering, obsession with institutions, you know, isolated individuals, alienated people, not talking to one another. And then suddenly, like out of nowhere, out of the blue, Ukraine's like shaking us awake and being like, no, you guys are the model. Please wake up. Like you're so much like better and more worthwhile than you even realize you are. And to me, when I look at Ukraine, I see a spirit that I'd like to see in America personally. So, my criticisms, I really, I have nothing right now I would want to say I change about Ukrainians or Ukrainian society. Ukraine is a little chaotic, man. I like that. A little chaos is freedom. I think that's what confuses the Russians so much. The Russians are not chaotic. They're a top-down, controlled from the Tsar society. It's kind of like they don't even know what to make of the Ukrainians. That's why they screwed this up so bad. Don't screw with the free people. That's what I've been told a lot by the Ukrainians. It's like, well, why are the Russians losing? Well, they sent slaves to liberate a free people. It's like, yeah, well, that's true. And I'd like to, I'd like Americans kind of take this note and understand that, what we're fighting for and what we believe in and what the Constitution stands for and what our values have been for a very long time. This is not expired. Authoritarianism is not an appropriate alternative. We kind of have a lot more right than we have wrong. And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's really more America I change than Ukraine. I know that's not a satisfying answer to your question, but I'll leave changing Ukraine to you guys. You're the Ukrainians. You've got a lot I'm sure you want to change about your own country, and I'll change mine and support you in the meantime.
You said that you don't have a Ukrainian family. You are not Ukrainian. You don't have a Ukrainian girlfriend, Ukrainian family, but I see that you have a Ukrainian soul, so thank you for your answer.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
That's true.
I take that as a huge compliment.
So, the most genuine one. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and we are going on. Any questions? I know that there are some people there online who have questions. So, could you please pick up? Yeah, Artem, welcome.
Hello, Paul. My name is Zhytomyr Polytechnic. I'm studying on Faculty of International Relations, and I have few questions for you. What is the future for Ukraine if Trump wins? What will happen to arms supplies, and will we be able to use the land-lease if Trump win related?
Well, yeah. So I would just say, look, I want to have victory before the election. So that's my goal. Let's win 1991 borders and have Ukraine and NATO and the EU before the election. If Trump wins, I honestly I truly don't anticipate a huge shift in U.S. policy. I just think, look, America is much more consistent on these things, I think, that we're given credit for. I remember with the original Trump administration, I'd go to Europe and you meet with the Germans and they'd lament to you how democracy is over and the transatlantic relationship is over, and it never is, because America is not the person in the Oval Office. We have a massive federal system, 50 states, each with a governor, local governments. Decentralization is the way that the United States is structured, not to mention a Congress that is totally independent of the executive branch and basically frames the executive branch. So it's really incumbent upon the Congress to provide the money to supply the arms, and we could put more pressure on if there was hesitating. But as I mentioned earlier, also, Republican national security people and professionals tend to be just as hawkish, or not more hawkish, on Russia than a lot of the Democrats tend to be. And I think there's actually a lot more consensus on supporting Ukraine than one might think. There was a Gallup poll not too long ago that I was mentioning a lot when I was in Ukraine last. It was like, 61% of Republican voters, registered Republican voters, view Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a critical national security threat to the United States, and 58% of Democrats do. So, it's just kind of like, the kind of Reagan-style Republican spirit still exists, even though Trump doesn't represent that. But then I think there's always this question of what does Trump actually represent? Is he a harbinger of this kind of, whatever, white nationalism, whatever it's going to be? Or is he really just more kind of a personality, that kind of just shifts with the times? So it's hard to say. I mean, I hope in one sense we won't have to find out because I love one, but I guess I wouldn't put too much worry into that because the questions now aren't for Trump. Biden is the president. This administration has to send the stuff. This administration must stop hesitating. This administration has a reputation for hesitation and worry about the future of Russia. So we have to focus on this administration right now. The Republicans are not in power right now. The Democrats are. So it's important that I think we focus on what is at the moment and really focus on winning, as opposed to kind of the hypotheticals of what might happen in the future. But I'll tell you, you've got much deeper support in the USA than I think the Ukrainians may believe. And honestly, more deeper support for the transatlantic relationship and for kind of basic American values. I mean, it's in our Constitution, right? I mean, the kind of stuff we're supporting around the world is what our society is based on.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for the question and thank you for the answer, of course. Thank you. So let's go further. Maxim, we see that you want to ask something. Welcome.
Yes. My name is Maxim Chirkov. I'm also a student. My question is, considering the evolving nature of conflicts and their impact on human rights, what measures can the Helsinki Commission propose to strengthen international mechanisms in order to better protect people's rights during times of war? Are there any innovative approaches that have been explored to address the unique challenges faced by Ukraine? Thank you.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, we have worked, the sort of Magnitsky sanctions and global Magnitsky sanctions and all this kind of thing, like a lot of the human rights mechanisms that are used by the United States, were innovated at the Helsinki Commission and ultimately became global style tools. I think for me, the last year and a half has been revelatory about what supporting human rights really means. And what it means right now is killing Russians. I hate to kind of put it like this, but the reality is the best way to support human rights is give Ukraine lots of weapons. Because there comes a time at which the dam breaks, right? And you've got to fight. I don't think there's going to be any innovative mechanism to stop Russian human rights abuses because Russia's doctrine is terrorism. Russia doesn't commit terrorism on accident. They're committing genocide to try to terrorize Ukraine into submission. So the way you stop that is by giving Ukraine the means to stop it from happening, to kick the Russians out of Ukraine, which means, destroying the Russian military. It's, in one sense, it's kind of a reminder of what we wanted to forget, right? It's just the same kind of thing of, wanting to paper over the notion that at the end of the day, all human rights are based on superior arms. And we wanted to believe that we could have this kind of international framework, prosecutions and stuff like that. And all that's important, but if it's not backed up with superior firepower, it doesn't matter. I think your president said it best, freedom must be better armed than tyranny. And that's really the truth. So it's been weird for me, as someone that has worked mostly on, anti-corruption and financial mechanisms and prosecutions and this sort of thing my whole life, to suddenly, trade agreements and stuff like that. I'm all for international mechanisms, worked on them forever. But suddenly I'm over here advocating for, weapons, learning about different weapon systems and, pushing our government to get them to Ukraine and all this kind of stuff, and just in a hurry kind of getting this all together, because at the end of the day, none of this means anything if it's not backed up with force. And it's been, I think it's a hard lesson for the West to learn. I mean, America a little bit more easily than a lot of Western Europe, in particular Germany, that wanted to really believe they'd evolved beyond kind of even the use of weapons. But I think that like that's maybe the lesson we all need to draw from this at the end of the day is, have a big military.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And we have one more question. Yeah, welcome.
Hello, Paul. My name is Ivan Novoselov. I'm the PhD student of Zhytomyr Polytechnic, and I want to ask you about the democracy, because our dear friend, the friend of Zhytomyr Polytechnic, the Estonian ambassador to Ukraine, Mikhail Kusk, once said that by helping Ukraine with weapons, with money, and so on and so forth, we actually are investing in future democracy, in the safety and security of future democracy. And I want to ask you, do you think that is true or not? And if you think that it's true, what do you think about other world? Do they understand this? And what should we do as the Ukrainians, as maybe students of Ukraine and maybe the United States, to convince others that by helping us, they're investing of future safety for democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, nothing is more important for the future of democracy than Ukrainian victory. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind. I mean, the vision of Russia and China is to, overturn an international framework that makes the world safe for democracy. I mean, everything we've built since the end of World War II has been investing in democracy and human freedom. I mean, democracy is, it's like it's the Churchillism, I mean, it's the best of worst systems, the worst except for all the others, and I mean, it's worth fighting for, and absolutely, I agree with that sentiment. I mean, as far as, encouraging others, I mean, again, nothing succeeds like success, help the military succeed, I mean, win the war. I think that the Ukrainians have done a great job in the info space. I mean, as many of you probably know, I have been an active participant in the info war myself. Russia is particularly talented at the info war, flooding the space with disinformation. America has been particularly bad because we don't even understand as an info war. We have no clue what we're doing, basically. We've completely forgotten how to wage an info war because of this triumphalist thinking and this erroneous notion that democracy would succeed on its own, when in fact the opposite is true. So obviously that matters. So I mean, engaging in that, and I mean just flooding the zone and flooding the world with pro-Ukraine content, I mean, it helps. It's funny that it helps, but the reality is, you could be the smartest person and the most critical thinker in the world, but if 9 out of 10 things you see is Russian propaganda, you're going to believe Russian propaganda. I mean, I think we've taken on the whole information space totally falsely. Our approach has been mostly focused on what we call sort of, information literacy, critical thinking skills. None of that helps. I mean, at the end of the day, you just need lots and lots and lots of information that is kind of like the truth. You need to flood the zone with the truth. And the Ukrainians have been pretty good at this, also just straight up ridiculing Russia. I mean, you have no idea how much it helps to just poke the bear and demonstrate that Russia is not invincible. I mean, Russia is just a big lie, right? I mean, Russia's done a good job at getting the world to believe its lies and getting the world to believe it's invincible and can't lose wars and stuff like that. If you believe it can't lose a war, then you're going to encourage Ukraine to surrender. But then suddenly, when you see that then Russia is actually weak and built on sand, well, then suddenly it becomes, well, maybe we should support Ukraine. So, I mean, I would just say, keep doing what you're doing, keep spreading it, and, keep being out there in English so we can all understand you. Eventually, more people will be learning Ukrainian, I'm sure, as Ukrainian soft power increases. But for now, help us to understand you, because I think Ukraine's got an amazing story to tell. And I think once people do understand Ukrainians, they sort of fall in love. I mean, what's not to love? I mean, it's an incredible story that Ukraine has. I mean, it's like, in a sense, it's the quintessential, to me, the quintessential American story. It's how we like to view ourselves, you know, the up-and-coming underdog has to fight against all the odds, but eventually comes out on top. So that's what we're going to see with Ukraine.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your answer. And you know, just like having Ukrainian soul, you should definitely try and feel Ukrainian spirit. And do you know that the best place to feel it, that's Zhytomyr Polytechnic?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that so? Is that the motto of the university?
Yeah, and you know that we just want you to know that you're always welcome whenever and wherever it is, and we would be more than great to open our doors to you here. So welcome to Zhytomyr Polytechnic. And we do not want to overtake the time much more. So we do hope the much hotter discussion here at Zhytomyr Polytechnic, and we would love to express our sincere gratitude for you to find time and opportunity to be here with us, and also show our most profound and sincere appreciation of everything that has been told by you. So thank you very much. And we're also very thankful to Mykola for making it possible. Thank you very much. And just sending the most profound and the warmest greetings to you, Paul. And thank you very much for standing with us. Thank you very much for making such, you know, a profound contribution to restoring Ukraine and just like, you know, boosting our minds, providing us with that much powerful insights and just boosting our spirits to move on and actually do everything possible for our country to get the victory as soon as possible. So, thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for having me. You know, God bless you. Slava Ukraina.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Всім дякую. Всім дякую. Я так думаю, що ще питали, ви питали.
Так, що питали.